I want to hear cannons. Downfield, pull up, ball to the 5, touchdown Tampa Bay. Mike Evans does it again. Fire the cannons, Bucs.
It's first and goal. That's picked off. That's picked off. And who else? Rondé Barber. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers may ride to the Super Bowl with that one.
Third down, 18. Dropping Gannon, looking Gannon. Those up with the heads and a shot. At the 40. Derek Brooks 30. Brooks to the 25, 20. Derek Brooks all the way. There it is. The dagger's in. We're going to win the Super Bowl. And then the cannons come. Fire them. Keep on firing them. Keep on firing them.
Hello and welcome back, Bucs fans, to this week's midweek edition of the Cannon Fire Podcast. Today, we're going to catch you up on all the latest Buccaneer headlines and news as we look ahead to Week 4's game against the Philadelphia Eagles. Evan, we are a couple of days removed from Sunday's performance against the Denver Broncos. The Bucs sitting at 2-1, their first loss on the season. And I think the overreactions that come after the first loss of the season are always justifiable to a degree, but I gotta say, the way the Bucs played on Sunday still kind of have a sour taste in my mouth, and we're going to talk about that as well today.
Yeah, I think it's because, they're playing up against a team that, quite frankly, they were better than, and they probably should have beaten, especially on paper at least, that the Broncos were a struggling team, 0-2 coming into this game, and but also, I think this is a good reminder to to the Buccaneers and to the fan base also. It seems like this is the NFL, and anybody can beat anybody. And look, if you don't show up, those are still professional football players on the other side there. So you're going to get beat. I mean, that's just that's simple. I don't really care who you are, how good you are. You're going to get beat. We've seen it. We saw it a couple times, in the Tom Brady era, right? Where we talked about, that game at Washington in 2021, the Buccaneers went 13-4 that year. One of those losses was to a pretty average to maybe below average Washington team. They didn't show up. They got beat. So, that's what's going to happen. And when you look unprepared and you look sloppy and, you don't play, I mean, both sides of the football too. It wasn't just one side, because maybe you can overcome that, right? Against a not so great football team, you might be able to overcome one side of the ball, maybe not holding up their end of the bargain. You can't overcome two though. And the Bucs couldn't do it. And I think it's a good wake-up call, right? Because I do think most people expected them to be 2-1. So I don't think the sky is falling, right? I don't think it's so push the panic button, this team stinks, this and that. You still expect them to be 2-1. They're sort of right where you thought they'd be, or at least most people thought they would be. It's just disappointing because, man, they had a golden opportunity to go to 3-0 for the first time in almost 20 years. And they squandered it away with a pretty poor performance at home, especially.
Yeah, and I think the 3-0 start is really besides the point. I think the most frustrating part of it is this, and this is just for me. Maybe other people feel the same way. I know a lot of people were very high on this team and head coach Todd Bowles after that Week 2 performance on the road against Detroit. How could you not be? But it frustrates me to no end when I go on this very podcast after a performance like that in Detroit, and I say, quote for quote, dare I say it, I believe this team has turned a corner. And then the following week, they give us a performance like that. Because again, it when you go back and you watch the game film, Todd Bowles talked about it. This game was as bad as we thought it was. The execution just wasn't there. The effort wasn't there. The injuries are one thing, and we will talk about that before the show is over. But there were a lot of things that were not on the field Sunday afternoon for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and dare I say the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were one of them. We know that this team is better than what they showed us on Sunday. This team knows that they're better, and I think that's the frustrating aspect of it. But to kind of put a cap on it, those are the wins that you would like, right? At the end of the season, when you look at not only the schedule that the Bucs have left to play, but the teams that they were winning against, the teams that they have beat so far in this season, a loss like this is the difference between a 9 or a 10-win season, a 10 or an 11-win season. When you're looking back at all the games that you wish you had back, you look at that Broncos game and you're like, man, if only they were prepared. But the only thing they can do now is be prepared for a Philly team next week. And should be an interesting game to see what kind of shape Todd Bowles has these guys in. But let's talk about some more pressing matters and that has to do with the offense. Seems like today's show is going to be a lot of the offense, Evan, and we have got some running back controversy, if you will. I think this seed was planted before the start of the regular season. I mean, we talked with Trevor Sikkema from Pro Football Focus before the start of the season, and he was very high on Bucky Irving. He talked to a lot of the draft analyst guys after the Bucs made the pick and they pick up Bucky Irving out of Oregon. People were very excited for not only the ceiling that this kid has, but the skill set that he brings in year one. And we've seen it on display early for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So I think people know what we're getting at here, but the ultimate argument is going to be when and why does Bucky Irving deserve the running back one role for this Tampa Bay Buccaneers football team? And I think it's interesting when you kind of throw the running back one title on a guy, especially in this Buccaneers offense, because if being a running back one in this Buccaneers offense has meant anything at all in the last 5 years, I'd like someone to explain to me why. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that I think Bucky Irving can be running back one, and him and Rachaad White are still able to thrive and have the success that they have had in past seasons, Rachaad White in particular, in this offense. I think they can do it. I think Liam Coen gets creative enough with two running back sets to where there is a situation where the Bucs come out with two running back sets, and both of these guys can benefit. Both of these guys can be legitimate playmakers for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, whether you're looking run and pass. We'll talk about that. We'll dive into it here over the next couple of minutes. But, I mean, Evan, your initial thoughts here on Bucky Irving versus Rachaad White, because if you've been watching with your eyes over the first 3 weeks, I think the difference in running the football is very clear between these guys.
It is. And again, we talk about the difference in run styles and stuff like that. And look, I mean, Irving is going to be, I guess, prettier to look at, when he's running the ball, right? It's more explosive. It's quicker. It seems like it's a home run waiting to happen, basically, right? And Rachaad White is more patient, more calculated. So that's the biggest difference I can see. Irving is not a finished product in pass protection. He's not a finished product in the passing game. I think that could be a thing that maybe holds him back, especially that pass protection aspect of it. But when you're looking at this, it does sort of feel like a when now, right? Not necessarily an if. Bucky Irving gets more and more snaps, and Todd Bowles even said it this week. Todd Bowles said that now, Bucky Irving has earned some more snaps. So I'm curious to see exactly what that means, right? Like, what does that entail? Is it 50-50? Is it just, okay, he's going to get a little bit more work here and there? How do they exactly split that up? I'm curious to see that. But, I do think there is a chance. And again, it is funny how, like you said, before the season, there were people sort of not necessarily predicting this, but murmuring about it, right? I'm sort of saying about how, well, Bucky Irving's going to replace him. And everybody's like, all right, like, chill for a minute, and I don't think Bucky Irving is like the running back one right now. Okay. That's not what we're saying right now. That's not what Todd Bowles said either. But I do think that eventually it might be the case. Like it might be the case. Rachaad White had 42 snaps on Sunday. That's 74% of the snaps. Bucky Irving had 18, 32% of the snaps. And he was pretty productive in those 18, right? Had 3 catches, I Bleav had 9 carries. So, 12 touches, only 6 times he was out there and didn't get a touch of the football. So they clearly want to get him involved when he is out there. I would expect, moving forward to maybe, expect that number to be in the 20s, maybe, right? Maybe the 30s, but I wouldn't expect it to be, such a dramatic switch. But I do think, eventually as time goes on, look, if Bucky Irving is going to keep doing what he does, and Rachaad White, it's not that Rachaad White's been bad. I guess he's been maybe underwhelming, I would say is the word, especially running the football, like between the tackles, has been underwhelming. But if Bucky Irving continues to provide a spark to this offense and continues to be that spark plug, it's hard not to keep giving him more and more snaps. So I do think you're going to see that over the course of time here within the next few weeks.
Yeah, and I know the offensive line is also going to factor into this conversation. The type of runs being set up for these running backs by Liam Coen at offensive coordinator, the play call, the situation in the game, all of that stuff is going to matter. But even if you are just a scoreboard box score watcher, Rachaad White's averaging less than 2 yards per carry so far in 2024, and Bucky Irving is sitting pretty with 6.2. So, I mean, the numbers are there to make the argument. And I will say this. You talked about Todd Bowles finally addressing it. The media talked to him after the Bucs' Week 3 loss to the Denver Broncos. And up at the podium, he said that, quote, the opportunities that Bucky gets, he makes the most of. He's a heck of a football player. We just have to get him more opportunities. And by more opportunities, you know, this entire conversation here, I think going back to what I said about what it truly means to be a Buccaneers running back one, I don't think it means a damn thing. You know, because, again, since we have covered the Bucs, has this team ever had a viable running back, aside from maybe Doug Martin in a contract year? When have they ever had a viable running back that they can consistently lean on to carry the pace of the game week in and week out? Now, Bucky Irving is just a rookie. I'm not saying he has the ability to do that, but making him RB1 on the depth chart does not mean that Rachaad White does not have a role in the offense. I think that is the important clarification and kind of the point that we are trying to make here. Now, with that being said, Josh Capo over at Pewter Report did a really good film breakdown of the offensive side of the ball. I think he's got a defense one coming out soon. But these are just some quick notes that he was able to put down. And I think this can kind of help us take a look at the approach that Liam Coen may potentially take with these guys and how creative he chooses to get. Now, featuring 2 running backs out of this backfield, he doesn't have to have it figured out tomorrow. We're still kind of in the early window of the NFL season. Bucky Irving still getting his feet wet, very much so in the grand scheme of his NFL career. But you start to ask the question, where are the 2 back sets, right? Both of these guys work well enough to where you can run the football, you can pass it, and either one can be an asset. We've talked about Rachaad White before being deadly in the passing game when he gets started in a game like that. Bucky has definitely got the juice and the physicality to push this run game to levels it hasn't been recently. Here's a couple of really good notes, though, about how Liam Coen uses his offense and specifically his offensive personnel. He is super creative from 21 personnel, which is 2 running backs, 1 tight end, and 2 wide receivers on the field. The best runs so far for the Buccaneers this season have come from this personnel grouping, as well as a 12-yard screen to Chris Godwin on Sunday's game. Now, another thing to consider is how these guys are being used and how Liam Coen is propositioning them and basically running the football. The Bucs so far, when you look at zone running and gap running, out of the zone, the Buccaneers had 8 carries and 31 yards for 3.9 yards per carry. Running out of gap formations, the Bucs had 8 carries and 60 yards, averaging 7.5 average yards per carry. Bucky Irving got 2 zone runs and 7 gap runs. Rachaad White got 6 zone carries and no gap runs. We got a $20 super chat here on YouTube from Dagan Parker. Thank you, sir. He said, what do you guys think about the Bucs running more dime when Vita Vea comes back? I feel like we wouldn't be losing much in the run fit because our defensive backs are very secure tacklers, and we have the speed at linebacker. Sorry for being unrelated. It's all good. We appreciate the super chat, Dagan. Thank you very much. I think the first super chat we have seen from Dagan Parker. So do we have, yeah, there it is. Clap it up. All right, so let's finish the conversation on the running backs here, Evan, and then we'll kind of dive into the other side of the football. Great question from Dagan, but looking at this personnel usage, looking at Liam Coen and how creative he has gotten with this personnel set in the past, I see no reason why by the end of the year the Bucs cannot effectively be running 2 running back sets with the skills that both of these guys have. Like I think that there is a ton of potential here if they can just learn how to dial it in.
Yeah, I do think there is it can be a benefit, right? It doesn't have to be you're pinning these guys against each other. How about they just work together, you know? the Titans had it for years when it was DeMarco Murray and Derrick Henry, and then it was Derrick Henry and a guy like Tajay Spears, or stuff like that. And the Cowboys had it with Zeke Elliott and Tony Pollard. Like, two running back sets are not something that's, especially, or utilizing two running backs, I should say, is not something that's uncommon, right? It's something that it has worked in the past with different teams. We just haven't really seen that in Tampa Bay because they've barely had one good running back, let alone two. So it has worked, and I am curious if it's going to be something that they look to do more. This is something from Mason Dodd on Twitter, who would just point out, this was during the game on Sunday, but Rachaad White this season has 31 carries for 66 yards. Bucky Irving has 24 carries for 145 yards. So it's a big difference. And look, I think the biggest difference is Bucky Irving's seeing different boxes than Rachaad White is.
Yeah.
I think they're doing, like I said, Bucky Irving only had 18 snaps, right? Rachaad White had like 42 on Sunday. So I think if Bucky Irving gets more snaps, the Bucs aren't a very good running football team, right? And I don't think like putting in Bucky Irving is going to automatically change that and make it a little bit better. But I don't think it's going to be like, oh man, they're great at running the ball now.
Right.
So I do think like if Bucky Irving does get more snaps, I think fans will be like, oh man, I thought this was going to sort of turn into something else, and it really didn't. I could see that, right? I could see that where people are like a little disappointed because it's not like night and day. But that's not really the point. The point is, also keep Rachaad White fresh, keep both guys fresh. It's a long season. You're only through 3 games. So I think if it benefits the offense and it keeps both guys fresh, I would definitely utilize more of that 2-back set. And especially with a guy like Liam Coen being as creative as he is, I do think that could be a benefit, more than a detriment, basically.
Yeah, and Kurt Maxwell with a point in chat here. He says, Bucky Irving is not small. He is bigger than Warrick Dunn was and roughly the same size as Kyren Williams for the Rams. He can take all the snaps they want to give him. Now, for the people who are concerned about the injury aspect of it or just simply running this guy into the ground, Bucky Irving getting more snaps over the course of the year, if he is an effective runner, do you think that takes a toll? I mean, I know the running back is already kind of a disposable position, depending on who you ask, but would you be worried in the long run about overworking this guy by the end of the year? Or, he's a hungry rookie running back who wants these snaps, just let it eat. What's your opinion on it?
Yeah, there's pros and cons to it, and again, I wasn't necessarily saying like I think Bucky Irving's going to get hurt. And I never, I wasn't saying he was small or anything. Just saying about how I think it's valuable to keep both guys fresh. Keep both guys. The hits they pile up at the end of the year, and it's definitely. But I do think that's one of the things where, just as Brandon mentioned in the chat about the pass blocking, right, about pass protection. And while he may not be small, he's not a finished product in pass protection yet. And that's something that the Bucs are going to need, especially when they're facing a lot of these blitzes and stuff like that. Like, they're going to need their running backs to, hold up as best they can in pass protection. I don't necessarily think like, running him into the ground and stuff like, he's not going to be as effective by week, 12 or whatever. I don't really think I think it's more how you utilize him. And I think having a guy like Rachaad White there would benefit him more. When it was Doug Martin, it was just Doug Martin. Like, there really wasn't another dude, right? There really wasn't, especially Doug Martin's rookie year, when it was like really, like they were really, running him into the ground. There was like nobody else, right? I mean, LeGarrette Blount was on the team, but they barely played him. So I mean, it was basically Doug Martin. Now in this situation, Bucky Irving, and this is a Bucky Irving even gets a lot more snaps, right? Let's say it's 50-50. You have another guy like that in Rachaad White who's been there, is at this point he's a veteran. It's year 3 for Rachaad White. Like, at this point, you're a veteran in the NFL. And I do think that it's a benefit to both guys to keep both guys fresh. Because look, he may not be small or whatever. He can take all the snaps you want, whatever that is. By week 10, your body's gonna be hurting. This is the NFL. And the hits take a toll. So that's basically what we're saying. I think it's a benefit to having 2 guys rather than having 1. So that's basically the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, let's talk about the offensive line really quickly here before we talk about the other side of the football. After first watching that game, I kind of gave the O-line a little more grief than I should have last week. It was an inexcusable performance, don't get me wrong. I mean, there wasn't really much of anything on this Buccaneers football team aside from like Chris Godwin last week, maybe Zion McCollum. There weren't a lot of guys above criticism. The offensive line for sure has to be better.
On the top performers, I had 2 guys in the positive thing.
Yeah,
that'll tell you a lot.
Yeah, the offensive line has to be much better. But when it factors into this run game and you look at the personnel the Bucs have had so far this season, Cody Mauch's got to get a little bit better. He's had a rough start to the season. Kind of expected him to pick up at a better pace, and he just hasn't yet. Ben Bredesen and Graham Barton. I know Graham Barton has had a couple of flashes, but overall, I think before we start to see leaps and bounds with this run game, you can give Bucky Irving 20 carries a game as much as I would love it. But before we do any of that, we still have to make sure we talk about the offensive line just stepping up and performing better than they have been. Even Tristan Wirfs kind of looks out of sorts here early in the year.
It's weird, man. He does. And I've seen some people say, oh, it's because he got paid and this and that. Like, I think that's more so coincidence than anything. I don't really think it's, of like, oh, yeah, we got paid. Now he's gonna stink, and he hasn't stunk. It's just to his standard, he hasn't been, what he hasn't been what the Bucs need, right? And he, if you want me honest, he hasn't been what the Bucs paid him for, right? Like he hasn't paid, he hasn't lived up to that yet. Not saying he won't. I'm sure he will. Just right now, it hasn't really worked out. And then Cody Mauch. Cody Mauch has actually been probably the biggest disappointment for me. This is along the offensive line, just because you're expecting the guy he had a decent rookie season. It wasn't great. It wasn't terrible. And you're expecting him to make another jump, and instead it just has not worked. And on Sunday, he got worked multiple times. I mean, multiple times. And the offensive line, just like you said, was simply not good enough. And we could talk about, and there's a point I want to bring up about, Baker and stuff later, but, you talk about running the football and like, everybody's like, oh, why can't they run the ball? The offensive line's part of it, right? Yeah. It's a big part of it. So I don't know if it's going to get better this season. I don't know how much better it's going to get, because this is just the run schemes they have, this is the offensive line they got. I mean, this is, they're not going to be adding anybody major, to the team or anything like that. So I am curious to see how it's going to work. Now, some good news. I think J.C. Allen tweeted out this morning that the Bucs are expected to have Luke Goedeke pass concussion protocol. So he's on track right now. It's still early in the week, but he's on track to play against Philly on Sunday. So that'll be a big help, right? Because Justin Skule was better against Denver than he was against Detroit. It helps you're not going up against Aiden Hutchinson. That's shocker, but that dude's really good. But again, I do wonder if like one of those 5 being out sort of affects the other 4. And hopefully that's the case. Hopefully when Luke Goedeke gets back, they can all start playing, much better, because they need to. Last week's performance was simply unacceptable. And if that keeps up, they're not going to win many more football games this year. It's that simple.
Yeah, it is the most surprising thing ever that the offensive line is in shambles without Luke Goedeke, because I think at the start of the year, if you would have told people that Luke Goedeke meant that much to the offensive line, even after the improvement he showed and the great season he had in 2023, I think a lot of people were taking him for granted. And here we are 2 weeks without him, and the Bucs have given up 12 sacks in 2 games, I think. And we'll talk about the quarterback as well, because he plays a factor into that. We will wrap up our conversation with the offense and talk about Baker Mayfield, the quarterback, because, I mean, I'll tell you this, man, Baker has got to get back to the headspace he was in week 1 and week 2. I know week 3 against Denver, it's very easy to say that the Bucs overlooked Denver. Todd Bowles says they didn't. Baker Mayfield says on the podium that maybe some of the young guys did. But the fact of the matter is he was not comfortable maybe at all during that game against Denver. And you can see it when he is out there playing, I don't want to say scared, but when he's not playing comfortable, he's basically causing more mistakes. A lot of it falls on the offensive line. 7 sacks last week for the Buccaneers offensive line given up, but Baker Mayfield definitely played a hand in some of those sacks, and a lot of it is just because he wasn't comfortable. It was a great defensive scheme by Vance Joseph to really figure out Baker Mayfield and leave him with not a lot of options.
The when I watched watched some clips of tape and stuff, I was a little more discouraged by what I saw about from Baker on Sunday. Hold on to the ball too long, getting happy feet when he doesn't need to. Like I said, it seemed like his first instinct on Sunday was kind of to roll out, right? And that's just not his game, right? He needs to stay in the pocket and utilize that as a bonus, right? Not necessarily your first option. And it seemed like too often when there was a rush, any sign of pressure, instead of trying to move around in the pocket, he immediately went outside the pocket, tried to make something out of nothing, and it causes, unnecessary pressure, causes unnecessary hits to you, right? Like you don't want him injured. So yeah, I was a little bit more discouraged. He had a few open guys that he had, and instead of hitting them, he sort of just scrambles. And I don't really understand, he did a great job of avoiding pressure against Washington and avoiding pressure against Detroit, but here it seemed like it was like he was creating his own pressure, like in his mind, and he was trying to avoid it. And I don't know exactly. Again, it's harder for me to come out here and say it.
Well,
He's out there, getting 300-pounders running after him. But still, the happy feet thing are a bit concerning for me.
Well, you remember this was kind of a talking point back in 2022 because Brady was getting rid of the ball so quickly, and it ultimately boiled down to him not having trust in his offensive line. Do you think that could be a little bit of a factor? I know it's early in the season, and it sounds drastic saying something like that, but I think it's true. Like, I think when you look at the fact that, as you alluded to, he was kind of in his own head all day. Like, there was phantom pressure, or it was pressure that he created on his own, because in the back of his mind, he's thinking, I got to get out of here immediately. I don't have time to stand here in the pocket without taking a hit. I need to make a play. Obviously causes more unnecessary mistakes, but is this 12 sacks in 2 weeks, 7 sacks against Aiden Hutchinson and the Lions last week? Do you think this could be a product of a bad performance by the offensive line, kind of leaving them out to dry last week?
Yeah, I mean, it was 5 sacks for 800 and 7 sacks against the Broncos. Broncos are worse. I do think, it is partly that maybe. I do think, trust in the offensive line, the lack of trust in the offensive line, especially after, you had Aiden Hutchinson, really game wreck the game, right?
I
and
mean, he
almost took it over completely.
Yeah, he was up his ass. There's no other way to put it. Like, everywhere he looked last week, Aiden Hutchinson was there.
Yeah, and we also thought, like against Washington, their interior didn't play as well. Jonathan Allen, Darren Payne got some reps, and so maybe it is. Maybe that is a factor. But again, I think then you got to learn to sort of trust your guys, right? Don't always
assume the worst.
You have to trust that they're going to do their job, right? If they don't, they don't. But that's on, excuse me, that's on Liam Coen. And, to design things to get the ball out quicker or maybe get you rolling out. That's not necessarily on you to, oh my God, I gotta get rid of this ball or I gotta scramble this and that. So I do think it plays a part, I think, for sure. But we saw, in 2022 with Brady, like when he was getting the ball out so quick, like it was a detriment to the offense. Like it hurt the offense. You're like, there's open guys if he just holds it another half second, but he wants to get the ball out so quick. And Brady obviously is not Baker, right? Baker can escape some pressure with his legs, can make, a 10-yard run. So yeah, Brady was definitely getting the ball out quick, but instead of getting the ball out quick, Baker really isn't doing that. He's holding on to the ball, but he's doing it while scrambling. So interesting thing here from Evan Winter, and this is a lot of people, say, oh, you're hating on Baker and stuff like that, because I guess you can't say anything bad about him. But apparently, what I was seeing also was true by the stats and by the head coach himself. So Evan Winter tweeted yesterday, per Pro Football Focus, Baker Mayfield accounted for 28.6% of his own pressures against the Broncos, which is the 5th highest rate among all quarterbacks entering Monday night. This was before the Monday Night Football games. This was tweeted out yesterday afternoon. Mayfield admitted to that on Sunday, and Todd Bowles reaffirmed he was responsible for a good chunk of the pressures / sacks on Monday. So in Todd Bowles' presser on Monday, he confirmed that, yes, he believed that Baker was responsible for a lot of the pressures and a lot of the sacks on Sunday. So, yeah, I'm not just sitting here trying to nitpick things. I'm seeing it with my eyes, and the stats back it up, and now the head coach and even Baker himself, are admitting it. So he didn't play well. He didn't play well on Sunday, and he's got to be much better because, they paid him to be, and hopefully he can bounce back from it, and hopefully Luke Gedeke coming back, changes a few things as well.
Yeah, the only thing they can do is bounce back, be better, play at the level they know that they can play, and let the rest of this season play out. 2-1 is not a death sentence for the Buccaneers season. Despite that disappointing performance against Denver, their season is not over. This team is going to continue to win games. Getting healthy and playing at the level they know that they can is a big part of it. Let's wrap up this week's midweek show talking about the defensive side of the ball here. Doesn't seem like there's as much of a conversation on the defense simply because when we talk about all the problems, look at the injury list. Look at the guys who are not out there. Look at the guys who have to get healthy. For the Bucs this week on the defensive side of the ball, it's going to be all about getting an update on Calijah Kancey, Vita Vea, and Antoine Winfield Jr. Now, Vita Vea, I don't think he is expected to play for another week in a row, but the jury is out. We got to wait and see what practice looks like for him. Hopefully we get some kind of update on Antoine Winfield Jr. And Calijah Kancey, I'm getting nervous because if we don't get any kind of update on what's going on with him, I think this is going to be something that drags out for the rest of the year.
Well, the interesting thing to me is if you don't get any update on a guy, especially like Kancey, why was he not put on IR then?
Right.
Because the IR would mean he's out. He's officially out 4 games. Okay, this will be game 4. So like, why would you not put him on IR? To me, you not putting him on IR signals that you don't think he's going to miss 4 games. So Vita Vea, he had a brace on his knee, I Bleav, on Sunday. So I'm not entirely even though they said he's day-to-day, I don't know. But I'm not entirely confident he's going to be out there. Winfield, we'll have to wait and see. It seemed like he didn't really have any, issues on Sunday. He's just sort of walking around in shorts and a T-shirt. So we'll see about him. Kancey, Kancey's a big one, and it is kind of boring, right, to talk about. Well, the defense is how do they fix it? Well, this guy get healthy, but it's the truth. I mean, it really is the truth. It's playing without 3 starters. Arguably, I mean, two of the 3 best players on the defense right now are not playing. Right, Vita Vea, Antoine Winfield Jr. Levante David's really the only one out there. And it's gonna be tough sledding, especially against you got Philly. Then you got Atlanta, then you got New Orleans, then you got Baltimore, then you got Atlanta again. I'm not saying those guys are going to miss all these games, but the point is you got some better offenses coming into town here. And quite frankly, they didn't play well against a Bo Nix. And the tape on that is embarrassing. I mean, the lack of pass rush. And again, and that's what does kind of concern me because, like, okay, we say, well, getting Vita Vea back, Calijah Kancey will be fine. It'll help, but the edge rushers were getting locked up, and I don't see it with the Bucs pass rush this year. So I think hopefully Vita Vea and Calijah Kancey can do enough, but I don't have much confidence in the Bucs rushing the passer.
There aren't any changes that can be made with the current personnel on the field to make the Buccaneers pass rush any better. We can talk about blitzing with guys out of the secondary and the linebacker, creating pressure that way, but Todd Bowles already does that. Like, that's already a big part of his game, these exotic blitz schemes and different defensive fronts. Like, that's all fine and dandy. That's all included in the game, but again, you talk about who's on the field for the Bucs. This was going to be a problem before the season, and we talked about it. This was probably my biggest concern with the Buccaneers this year. It's the reliance on young talent, but even when you don't have young talent or just pure playmakers out there, the guys who you do have out there just simply aren't enough. And there's nothing you can do. There's nothing the Bucs can do to make Greg Gaines or Joe Tryon-Shoyinka a better pass rusher. I don't think there's inherently any one thing that they could focus on to make those guys better. So like you said, getting Vita Vea back, getting Calijah Kancey back, it'll help, but, I mean, the Buccaneers have 2 sacks over the first 3 games. They are tied for dead last in the NFL. So creating pressure, again, regardless of any ideas that we want to have, it's going to have to come from your extra guys, because it sure as shit is not coming from your defensive line, unfortunately. And this is a really good way to tie in Dagan's question from earlier. He asked us on the $20 super chat. He said, what do you guys think about the Bucs running more dime packages when Vita Vea comes back? I feel like we wouldn't be losing much in the run game because of our defensive backs being very secure tacklers, and we have speed at linebacker. And I got to say, this is a pretty good question, because I think that this approach ultimately applies to what teams you're facing that week. You know, whatever Todd Bowles has got game planned, whatever his matchup looks like for Baltimore, probably isn't going to look the same against a team like New Orleans. But I think when you look at the teams that the Bucs are yet to face, coming out in a more dime-heavy set and relying on your tackling safeties like Jordan Whitehead and Antoine Winfield to make plays, I think that could be viable against a team that is very run-heavy. And we've seen a couple of teams have run success so far in this early part of the season against the Bucs.
I mean, the Bucs' next opponent, you know, with the Eagles with Saquon Barkley. Right? I mean, Barkley has been a major part in really all three of their games. Scores 3 touchdowns against the Packers, has the drop against the Falcons, and then has the big touchdown against the Saints. So really has been a factor in every single game so far this season. So coming up, you know, this is going to be something where the Bucs are going to have to find a way to shut down Saquon Barkley, you know, because he's been really good for the Eagles, and the Eagles' offensive line is usually one of the better ones in football. So I think, yeah, we're not going to have to wait very long to see, you know, and to sort of maybe test that out. You know, I do think, look, like, having Vita Vea there will help, right? It will help your run defense regardless. Like, just having that big of a dude, right? Just taking up that much space, taking up that many, you know, offensive linemen, I think is going to help. But I mean, it is a risk, because we've seen in the past, you know, even with Vita Vea, sometimes they have gotten gashed in the run game, and you're going to be playing some better teams, you know, with some better running games. But we'll see. You know, hopefully Vita Vea is back this week, and we can see if they do play a little bit of that. You know, a lot of teams do play some more dime nowadays, just because it is a more of a passing league anyway, right? So they are, you know, sacrificing a bit, you know, with the running game. So you know, I do think it's an interesting idea. I think it's something the Bucs could look to utilize. Maybe they're more inclined to utilize that when a guy like Kalijah Cansey's back as well, even though he's not the greatest run defender in the world. But I do think it's interesting. But again, yeah, they're speaking of the run game, their run defense, they're going to have to be on their toes with or without Vita Vea this week, you know, against Saquon Barkley. So
yeah, I mean, regardless, this entire defensive line is going to have to step up regardless. We talked about the injuries, the guys that you don't have. Not having Cansey along that defensive line, not having Vita Vea is obviously going to hurt. But the lack of production from everybody out there it's just inexcusable. And it's unfortunate, because headed into the year, felt like this was going to be a weakness. And then we kind of dreaded the thought, oh, what happens when you go down 1 or 2 players? How thin are you going to be thin? What's your depth going to look like? And the Bucs have been calling up practice. Yeah, the Bucs have been spending the last 3 weeks calling up practice squad guys. CJ Brewer has seen the field. Some of these other interior defensive linemen. And respect to those guys for getting it done, making the roster, and ultimately getting a spot to play in an NFL game. But they're not going to get the job done. They're not going to be a difference maker for you. And let me ask you this question here as we kind of wrap up. I feel like we've said this once a week, every single week, but are the Bucs eventually going to be forced to bring in some outside reinforcements? Because, listen, the Hassan Reddick thing, we're not going to go over that for the 12th time, because we've talked about why it's not a fit for the Bucs, why it will not happen, and why the Bucs just don't necessarily have the money to accommodate a guy like Hassan Reddick. But
I think it's a fit. It's an obvious. If you're living and breathing and you can rush the passer, it's a fit. But I just don't think it's feasible. Yeah.
Well, you know, think about Randy Gregory and what he potentially missed out on here. I don't know if the Bucs missed a ton with his presence, but it sure would be nice to have an extra outside linebacker.
No wonder he didn't show up. He saw these guys. He's like, oh God, I gotta get out of here. No, the shocking thing to me was when they were released, because clearly they signed Randy Gregory because they felt they needed help at that position.
Yep.
Clearly, right? They signed him because they felt they needed help there. Randy Gregory doesn't show up. They release him, and they don't do anything else. Oh, okay, but didn't you sign him because you thought you needed help in the first place? So you still need that help, right? Like, why didn't you try and bring somebody else in? I believe Yannick Ngakoue is now off the board. I think he just signed with the Ravens yesterday, returned to Baltimore. So there's another guy gone. There's really nobody else. I mean, what you're gonna convince Shaq Barrett to come out of retirement now? Like what are you gonna do?
Well, the
You
whole
know,
Shaq
like,
Barrett
and
thing.
Shaq Barrett is not gonna be saving this pass rush, by the way.
Well, the whole Shaq Barrett thing too. As hunky dory as a reunion with Shaq Barrett sounds, I would love that. I'm sure the locker room would love it. I'm sure the Bucs front office would love it to see Shaq Barrett officially finish out his career here. But if I'm not mistaken, the Dolphins still own his rights, so there would have
Yes,
to
the
be
Bucs would have to trade for him. Yes,
right. And I can't imagine the Dolphins are just going to let him go. So you're giving up resources that are going to matter for a guy who is not going to come in and single-handedly fix this pass rush. He may not even be a guy who gets 5 sacks this year. And that's just because of what we saw last year from Shaq Barrett. Hasn't been playing, hasn't been practicing, don't know what kind of shape he's going to be in. So again, a beautiful hypothetical. And it's a very happy storybook ending for everybody involved. But the NFL just doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just that's not really the thing, right? That's it's just like you said, that's not how that works. So I at this point, I don't know. Like I don't think anything's gonna happen. I don't think they're gonna be bringing anybody in. I think their hope is that Vita Vea comes back and Kalijah Kancey comes back, and it makes his pass rush a little bit better. But like I don't know, man. I just Yaya Diaby doesn't look great out there. Chris Braswell is a rookie coming along slowly, which we expected. Anthony Nelson's Anthony Nelson. Joe Tryon is okay. But I think they need this pass rush needs an overhaul in the offseason, and they need to get a legit guy. It feels like Jason Light has been, and Jason Light's been incredible, but it feels like when it comes to the pass rush, he's kind of hoping to, all right, let me see if I can just hit on one of these guys, right? Let me see if I can hit on one of these day 2 picks or one of these value free agents, right? Like he hit on Shaq Barrett, right?
Yeah.
And it just sometimes, man, you gotta dedicate some resources. Like sometimes you gotta find a way to dedicate some serious resources to the position.
Well, think about your primetime players from that Super Bowl defensive line: Vita Vea, Jason Pierre-Paul, free agent. Shaq Barrett, free agent.
Yeah.
Who else am I missing here? There's one more that I'm missing here.
I mean, if you're talking about edge rushers, I mean, just edge rushers.
Ndamukong Suh, free agent.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. If you're talking about just edge rushers, if you weren't, Ndamukong Suh could be an option. Even like guys that weren't as productive, like Akeem Hicks, like they signed him as a free agent. Like they haven't. They haven't drafted well when it comes to the pass rushers, right? I mean, they haven't really. Like, I think Yaya Diaby, is going to be a fine player. I don't think he's going to be a game wrecker. But like Joe Tryon, he's probably not going to be on the team next year. Anthony Nelson probably not on the team next year. Nelson was fine, for like a 4th round pick or whatever. Braswell coming along slowly. Like it's still too early to pass judgment on him. Logan Hall doesn't look great. Like, so like every time they've sort of, Kalijah Kancey, I think is good, but like he's not on the field, right? So, every time, they dedicate a resource to that, it just doesn't really seem to work out. And I don't know, man. I was talking with somebody before the season, and I forget, it's not a Bucs fan, not anybody associated with Tampa. They always asked me what my opinion was, and I told them, I said that I thought there was a legit chance. I wouldn't say it was 100% going to happen. I was like, there's a legit chance that like their pass rush is like historically bad, like when it comes to like sacks and stuff, just because that's the way I saw it. And right now they're kind of proving me right, and hopefully they can get back to it. They do have the fewest sacks in the NFL. I believe they are tied right now.
Dead last.
They are tied, I believe, with the no, they're actually, they are dead last now. Yeah, they are dead last.
And do we know, do we remember off the top of our head who those 2 sacks came from? Because I bet you at least one of them was not a defensive lineman.
I think it was I think Tryon was one of them.
I know JTS was the other one. I want to say it was like Jordan Whitehead or somebody was the other one.
Yeah, I don't remember. I'm gonna look that up and get back to you before we close out here. But last thoughts on the whole pass rush thing.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a concern. I think it's a hole that you have found yourself now in early in the season. And I guess it's better to find yourself at this point early in the season, I guess. But you're ultimately waiting around for these guys to get healthy. And I don't think I really don't think it's fair to the young guys along this defensive line that now a lot of people are very upset with them and their lack of production when it was already an uphill battle to begin with. Like Yaya Diaby, 8.5 sacks his rookie season. We talked about how headed into this year, I don't expect that kind of production again. Like I think the Bucs are banking on him getting better, but if he doesn't, then obviously that leaves the pass rush exactly where it is right now, where everybody's like, oh my God, they're historically bad. And like the lack of production on Yaya Diaby, I don't like you kind of get what I'm saying, right? I feel like he's getting more hate than he should simply because he doesn't have anybody else capable of doing the job around him. And he's a second-year pass rusher still trying to learn the lay of the NFL. And I think it's a very tough spot to be in because, like you said, the Bucs have done a lot of great building. We've given Jason Light a ton of props on this show, and I'm sure we will still continue to do that. He is a top 5 GM in the NFL, despite what the defensive line looks like, but building this defensive line has definitely been a misstep of his for sure.
So, yeah, I looked it up. It's Servassier Dennis is the other guy that has a sack. So, yes, one Bucs defensive lineman, one Bucs pass rusher has a sack, and that is 1 sack. So, fun stuff. Yeah, I don't think it's going to miraculously get better. You're just going to have to try. And like I said, maybe Yaya Diaby's a guy who you talk about, he's getting some hate or whatever. I think partially why he's getting some hate is the freaking situation he's in. Like,
right.
It's a situation, he is the team's number 1 guy. Like, it's his second year. Like, he led the team with 7.5 sacks last year. Like, he's the team's number 1 guy. This guy was a 3rd-round pick in 2023. Like, they're putting a lot on him, and right now the results haven't been great. But again, maybe he's a guy who, as the season goes along, just like he did last year, as the season goes along, maybe he's a guy who gets better. And hopefully that's the case.
Absolutely. But the way that I see it, we talked a lot today about Baker Mayfield playing comfortable, playing in the headspace that he was in week 1, week 2. He's going to have to get back to that regardless, because I think between now and the bye week for Tampa Bay, the offense is really going to have to be what wins you a majority of these games. I don't think the Bucs are going to have much luck pressuring any of these quarterbacks, making things difficult for them in the pocket, whether it's with pressure or just getting a hand in his face. They've shown that they don't have the ability to do either one. So it's going to be interesting to see how things continue to shake out, but ultimately looking for guys to get healthy and looking for the play to continue to improve. I think hopefully we get an answer on Kalijah Kancey sometime soon. We can get him back in the lineup. Having Vita Vea back will quite literally be huge. And then just another element as a pass rusher, getting Antoine Winfield Jr. I can't believe I'm saying that getting a safety back may potentially help our pass rush, but that's how diverse of a player he is. That is the skill set that he shows up with every day, and that's how much he means to this Buccaneers defense. They are missing some star power out there for sure, man.
They are, and hopefully they can get back, right? We'll see. We don't, they're off today, so we don't really have any injury updates right now. So besides what Bowles has told us on Monday, and he didn't really say much about it. So, we'll see. Hopefully they can get healthy, and because, it's a tough stretch here. And also, the Buccaneers, they play Philly, and then couple of days later, they're Thursday Night Football against Atlanta, so it's a short week after this week against Philly. So, they gotta get ready to go because their injuries and are going to be coming up, and they're going to be playing a lot of football games in the next 10 days or so. So, the injuries are definitely something where monitor, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Hopefully, it sounds like Luke Gedeke will be back on the offensive side of things. But yeah, the defensive side of the ball, especially, you want at least, I think, 2 of those guys back within the next 2 weeks, right? Like if you're going to hold them out for Philly, okay, but hopefully they're good to go in Atlanta. But again, Atlanta's a short week, so are they really going to be? That's a valuable, 2 or 3 days extra rest that they would have if the game was on Sunday. So We will see what happens, but yeah, the Bucs got to get healthy, but also they got to execute better. They got to play. We can't just pin it all on the injuries, right? We can't
Right.
say that. Oh, once these guys are back, they'll be dominant, right? They got to play better football, and I think Sunday was hopefully a wake up call, but I think we're going to get our answer on whether Sunday was a wake up call or not this Sunday against Philly. So Philly coming off of a big win, a game they looked really lifeless until the end, against New Orleans. And I think you're going to get your answer on whether or not they got the wake up call, right? Based on if this team comes out flat against Philly and they drop another one, I think you can start to question, where the season is going to be going. So, because I think it'd be back-to-back performances that are just not good enough, and you got some very important division games on the road coming up here. So, games that you got to have.
I am calling this week's game the Battle of the Frauds. And you heard it here first. Don't let anyone else make you think that they had this idea, because they didn't. My opinion is that whoever loses this game will be outed as this week's fraud. The NFL, especially early on in the season when teams come out and they play well, there's a big community of people who cannot wait for that team to lose. And I think whoever loses this game, just because of the situation that both teams find themselves in, they're going to kind of get stuck with that fraud moniker, because for Tampa Bay, you obviously want to come out and compete. I think if they show up lifeless like they did against the Broncos, then they are 100% frauds. But I think it's going to be a tough explanation for anybody who loses this game. Philly and the Bucs kind of, I don't want to say overhyped going into this season, but their respective fan bases have generated a lot of hype, and I think a lot of the other NFL fans are ready to shut that down. So, Battle of the Frauds this Sunday at 1 p.m. Bucs and the Eagles should be a good game. Of course, we will talk to you guys on Friday with the pre-game breakdown, and between now and then, we will keep you posted on any other breaking news. Make sure you follow us here on YouTube, youtube.com/cannonfirepodcast. You can also find us on social Buccaneer News as it happens. You can follow my co-host Evan on Instagram and Twitter at EvanNFL, and check out his written work at bucksnation.com. What have you got this week?
You're going to be taking a look at the X Factor for this coming week, which will tie into Players to Watch, which will be out Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon for you guys ahead of the game on Sunday. That's just a bunch of our YouTube content that if you guys are listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever it may be, we appreciate you listening. But if you want a little bit more content, head over to the Can of Fire Podcast YouTube channel and check out the stuff that we have throughout the week. It's not just the podcast that we do. It's, I think, 6 out of the 7 days of the week we have something. I think tomorrow, Wednesday, is the only day we have nothing, I think. So, we will have something, whether it's betting the Bucs, whether it's Players to Watch, or right after the game, whether it's top performers. We always have something for you guys, so be sure to stay tuned to all of the news and coverage on the Campfire Podcast YouTube channel.
Last but not least, you can find myself Instagram and Twitter at Retticus, RHETTAKUS. If you follow me, I will follow you back. Thank you once again, everybody, for hanging out with us live. MK, Mikey Kelly, Bat W, South 319, Brandon Funk. I like that name. Kurt Maxwell.
Dagan Parker, shout out to Super Chat. Gonna be eating some good Wendy's tonight.
Absolutely. $20 Super Chat from Dagan Parker. Thank you so much for supporting the show and donating to the Wendy's Fund. I think we're going to get off of here and enjoy a couple of junior bacon cheeseburgers. So we will talk to you guys Friday for the game preview. I'm your host, Rhett Matthew, signing off for my co-host, Evan Wanish. We will see you in the next one. Until then, and as always, go Bucs.